Hello. So I'm going to take you in this video through a short introduction to the West African myth of Sunyata. It usually is one of my students' favorite stories, and I think you'll enjoy it too. But mainly I'm going to talk about just some key concepts, things that you'll need to be aware of. What are some of the major plot points of the story that you'll need to be aware of? We're going to look at and examine some of the ways that Sunyata is like the epics that we've covered before, but also some ways that it is very different. All right, so let me see if it'll let me advance here. This is always a little bit challenging for some reason. So where we'll start is we know that Sunyata, like Gilgamesh, was a real historical figure. He was the founder of the Mali Empire. He lived from 1217 to 1255. Because he was a Leo, he was also nicknamed as the Lion King, which brings us to an interesting bit of trivia here. So, how many of you have grown up with the movie The Lion King? Yes, the Disney movie was directly inspired by the story of Sunyata. Now, this is the part where I usually will tell you this was not without some controversy because a lot of people were actually very upset with Disney at the time because they felt like uh, basically the wisdom was that Disney was taking this man who was a real African hero and sort of subjugating his story to an animal fable. You know, people were really asking, why does he have to be this little lion cub, Simba? Why can't we get a story about the real Sunyata? And that was, certainly a very valid concern, I think, that was being raised. Disney came back, of course, and defended the choice. They said that, well, first of all, they said The Lion King was not 100% based on Sunyata, that it was also based on Hamlet. There was some truth to that because the storyline with Uncle Scar was similar in some ways to the story of Claudius and Hamlet's father. But still, it goes without saying, most of that movie was based on Sunyata's story. And it was somewhat of a controversial decision, but it's still, that makes it interesting for us because you can actually, if you follow the movie The Lion King, you can see pretty much how the plot of this story was structured and what are its major arcs. And you can see, as Simba goes through these various stages of the hero's journey, how that also correlates with Sunyata's story in the epic. So remember, we have established that all myths grow out of oral tradition. Now, this is not something unique necessarily to West African culture. The number one mistake that a lot of my students make on the exams, for example, when we talk about what are the differences between Sunyata and, let's say, the Aeneid or Gilgamesh, well, they'll come back and say Sunyata was a myth from the oral tradition, whereas the others were written down. Well, that's not true, okay? The others, they came from oral tradition as well, and it was many, many years before they existed in some written form. And this was also true of Sunyata. I mean, it's still in written form. We've got it in our textbook. So the fact that it grew out of oral tradition is not something that makes it unique. But here's what does make it unique. which is who were these storytellers that this myth originated from. They were a group of storytellers and musicians known as the griots, and their purpose was, obviously part of their purpose was to keep the stories alive and pass the stories down, but also they were the keepers and the collectors of something that we call as a group the collective consciousness or the collective memory of the community. And I believe this next slide, African griots essentially serve the same function as we get with Native American shaman. Now, in Native American tribes, the shaman was usually an individual who had some early experience with the spiritual realm. These were individuals who were believed to be people who could communicate with the spirit world, and thus they became intermediaries between this world and the spiritual world, serving a function very similar to what we might have today with modern preachers and priests and other religious figures. But like the griots, they were keepers of the collective memory. They were the storytellers. They were the people who kept the myths and traditions of the tribe alive. All right, so now we get to that definition of collective memory. Collective memory refers to the shared pool of memories, knowledge, and information of a social group that is significantly associated with the group's identity. Now, there's a lot more here, as you can see, but I'm going to leave it right there with that because that pretty much in a nutshell sums it up. It is those shared memories that a cultural group has. Now, think about our collective memory. Because we, as a culture, we share certain values. The stories of the Hebrew Bible make up a lot of our collective memory. So that's why you can talk to most any individual if they came from the same background as you, they grew up in the same community, etc. You can talk to them about the story of Adam and Eve. You can say, okay, what do an apple and a serpent have in common? And they're going to be able to tell you, right, that those things are associated with the Adam and Eve story. That is collective memory at work. Now, I can give you another example. If, anybody that grew up in America of a certain age, well, you could say, who's Elvis Presley? And they're going to know the king of rock and roll. And now, people from my generation, if you say, or even your own, if you say, who is Michael Jackson? They know who that is, the king of pop. And this is collective memory, right? If I show you, let's say, a sparkly glove and a pair of loafers and a pair of high top pants, jogging pants, maybe some sparkly socks, I say, who does this remind you of? You're gonna know. Michael Jackson, MJ, right? The GOAT. Because he was associated with those symbols. Again, that's collective memory. People outside of our culture might not know, might not recognize that, but we do. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about this concept of collective memory. Well, the griots, again, in African culture, they were the people responsible for the collective memory of the community. The story of Sunyata was given to them so that they in turn could pass it on, so that it lived in the memory of the people of Mali. And I'm going to skip this from Carl Jung right now because that's not really going to be relevant for us right now. But I do want to talk about some ways that Sunyata is like the other stories that we've covered. For example, the first two stories recount Sunyata's conception. His birth is a prophecy. And we see that in The Lion King as well. When Simba is born, his birth is this great celebration because he is the coming of the prophecy. This does fit into what we already know about the epic hero and, what's required of the epic hero as far as the characteristics, what makes him an epic hero, because he is a product of divine birth. We still have that with Sunyata. He is the product of divine birth. He's, there was a prophecy. But from that point, now it does become quite different in the way that it handles this story arc. It's done, shall we say, in a much more humorous way than some of the other stories. With the search for a special wife, because Sunyata's father is instructed that he must take what they call the special wife, who in turn will give birth to the special child. And he goes through a lot of adventures just to get the child conceived. Because largely, he's relying on the soothsayers, and the soothsayers get it wrong, not once, not even twice, but on multiple occasions. So the first thing that they tell him is you must take 9 light-skinned women as your wife, and one of them will bear you the special child. Well, he takes 9 light-skinned women as his wife. None of them bear the special child. Then they're like, oh, well, we got it wrong. It's 9 dark-skinned women you must take as your wife. Now he's like, what the heck? Now I've got 18 wives, and still the special child is not born. So it's not until these 2 brothers come to the Mali Empire, and these 2 brothers, by the way, represent the coming of Islam. So this is also a story that recounts how and why the religion of Islam comes to the Mali people. Now, in the myth, these 2 brothers who arrive in Mali are symbolically bringing the religion of Islam, but they also bring the birth of Sunyata. So you can see how that's tied together, right? But it's the 2 brothers who capture Sagolan, who is the buffalo woman or the buffalo spirit. And she ends up being the one who gives birth to Sunyata. All right, so this video is probably about to cut off on me, so I'm going to end it here. I'm going to pick up with a little bit more discussion of this in the second part of this video. All right, so stay tuned because part 2 is coming.